Hello today, my name is Matthew here at Ripon Lodge, and today we're going to be talking about colonial tradesmen, who they were and what they did for a living. So to begin with, the original settlers here in Virginia, they were mainly farmers. They had worked the land, grew crops, and had sold their harvests to essentially provide for their families. And as colonial society expanded and there was a greater dependence on agriculture, there was this desire really to have an increase in man-made commodities. So to obtain these commodities, certain individuals were trained in specialized fields or trades really to produce these necessary goods and services. These individuals were known as tradesmen, and they produced products that would not only provide an insight really into the daily life of early American settlers, but also help sustain a colonial economy that would encompass not just North America, but also the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe, something we would call today the Atlantic Triangular Trade. So how did these professional tradesmen learn their craft? Well, for starters, to a tradesman, a craft was not just a job, it was essentially their livelihood. They were trained as novices, usually apprenticed to a master in that particular field, and the apprentice worked alongside the master craftsman, learning his techniques until they were old enough or skilled enough really to be able to work on their own. And so when it came to the master in question, sometimes they were the apprentice's parent, other times it might be a family member or a neighbor or even just a local shopkeeper in town. So when it came to actual trade work, it wasn't necessarily just restricted to men. You might actually have women actually helping to work in trades, at least as long as it was socially acceptable and suitable for them. So some women might actually work in less labor-intensive jobs like as seamstresses or as weavers. And professional tradesmen in the colonial era, if they were really talented at their jobs, they might actually go ahead and be contracted out to work special projects. So whether, let's say for instance, a carpenter, they might be commissioned to build a manor for a wealthy landowner. Or maybe you might have a blacksmith who is asked to forge a ceremonial officer's sword for a soldier's recent promotion. Either way, colonial tradesmen really were integral facets into early American life, and many of their specialities were, or at least still continue really into the 21st century. So there are many trades that we can talk about. But for today's purposes, we're only going to focus on a few common examples. And we can actually begin with the apothecary. So apothecaries were essentially the precursor to the modern day pharmacist. They were responsible for the manufacture and distribution of drugs and medicine. Because of their medical background, in the event that there was a trained doctor or a physician who was unavailable to assist ailing patients, an apothecary might actually step in and administer medical assistance. Now, an apothecary's job was also super important because they made sure that many colonists had access to medicine as much as possible, considering that disease was still pretty rampant in the 17th and 18th centuries. Another well-known and arguably one of the most important trades was that of the blacksmith. Blacksmiths were metal workers who, worked at heated forges, smelting, shaping, and cooling iron to, forge an assortment of tools and equipment and components. So some of the creations of a blacksmith might include workman's tools like a hammer, maybe some nails, maybe, door hinges, maybe even iron jail cell bars, so on and so forth. And a lot of these materials and tools that a blacksmith made would actually be used by other tradesmen, like say carpenters, for instance. So a carpenter was a woodworker who used lumbered wood to cut, build, and repair wooden structures like this home, for instance, or other municipal buildings. And so when a carpenter, at least their main job really was to help with the maintenance of colonial towns. And whenever they weren't really, building other structures, they might be employed to build basic furniture like tables, chairs, maybe some cabinets, maybe even upstairs, beds and dressers, so on and so forth. So moving upstairs into the Washington room, we're actually going to talk about another trade, and that is the gunsmith. And as the name implies, gunsmiths were responsible for the creation and maintenance of firearms and ammunitions. Now, gunsmiths actually used skills that were commonly associated with carpenters and blacksmiths. So a gunsmith might actually have to carve a rifle stock out of a piece of wood, or maybe even use a forge to melt down brass and iron to forge metal components for a gun, like the barrel and the matchlock. Now, gunsmiths were actually in high demand because they needed to properly outfit and equip local militias, and especially the Continental Army during the American Revolution. So it was imperative to make sure that they had working guns that worked efficiently and didn't misfire in their faces. And lastly, we can talk about apparel makers like weavers and tailors. So a weaver is a person who takes raw materials like cotton and wool, and they actually turn that into fabrics and textiles. It's then the tailor's job to sew together the fabrics, whether by hand or maybe with the help of a device like the spinning wheel here, to create articles of clothing. So we're talking about pants, shirts, jackets, dresses, undergarments, so on and so forth. These would be available for purchase in local stores. And so the apparel makers also had a really important job, because not only did they create clothing for the ever-changing seasons for colonists, but they also ensured that the Continental Army would also have official proper uniforms to distinguish themselves from the British Army during the Revolutionary War. But that's enough talk about colonial trades. What do you all think? What kind of trade would you have practiced if you were living in 18th century America? Leave a comment down below, and if you like this video, please check out the rest of our videos with Prince William County's Office of Historic Preservation. Until next time, this is Matthew signing off. Bye-bye for now.